Today, as we visit or revisit the topic of the storehouse, we look at a few things from the perspective of tithe and offering from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when we are done, hopefully, it'll help to provide evidence or basis for you to be able to continue to go back and to do your own personal study and to come to an understanding of how do you understand and feel that the scriptures then are applicable in talking to you, speaking to you, to guide you in your choices and your decisions. One thing we know for sure is that the time from Old Testament to New Testament is drastically different. So I want you to really visualize the whole concept of a storehouse, because today we talked about the storehouse and we try to pull it forward to this year. And then essentially we might say, well, it will be a room that is full of money, just kind of stacked up from floor to ceiling. We think about money bags just piled up. That is like a depository, and it holds millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. Whatever that amount is, just like bags of cash stacked up. And that's generally what we think about when we think like storehouse. When someone reads a text, bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, we might think that, or we might think, okay, well, bring all the tithe into like a central organization is what we would think of when we would hear that text being read. That there might be room provided for you to be able to receive the blessing then that the Lord would desire to pour out upon you. Malachi says that the windows of heaven would be open and that the blessing would fall. And yet there are many Christians who then would take that, and many teachers, pastors, or religious leaders will hold that out to say, if you return tithe and offering, God's going to bless you. And that sometimes is like the takeaway from that. You return tithe and offering, God's going to bless you. How much more so? That there not be room enough to receive it. So if you want to receive a whole lot, then give a whole lot. If you want to receive very little, then give a little. It would sometimes be like the takeaway that people infer by that, all right, I need God to bless me like really big. So therefore, I'm going to give like a really big gift to God so that he can bless me really big. Because the opposite of that would be what one would infer, that if I give a really small gift to God, then he's going to give me like a really small gift. So it's like almost a 1 to X factor. So whatever you do here is going to multiply it based upon these certain things, whether it's 2X, 3X, 4X, whatever the case may be. That's the perception that many times people have, or that it is presented as such. And I would challenge some of those thoughts, and we'll go back to the historical use first off for a storehouse. So think of a storehouse similar maybe to what is on the screen, that you had the gathering when they would bring in their grains, because that's what it's talking about. They would bring in their grains, they would bring in their wine, they're bringing their oil. And all these things are being put in, they're stored in a room, hence storehouse. So those things are coming in and they are laid into this room. And so we have these grains of wheat. We may have corn with flour, the things that we would, of course, press to be able to make oats and flours and so forth. Various nuts and oils and wine was there. All these things being stored in this particular place in the storehouse. Well, that's what we see in Malachi. But how do we get there to Malachi? So let's turn back to Genesis chapter 14 and beginning in verse 18 through verse 20. Some of the very first passages that we see on the institution of tithe will come certainly from the Old Testament. It is important to be able to note that these things come about in the context that they derive as well. Genesis 14, 18 through 20, after Abraham has gone to defeat the enemy and to recapture, or rather to take back his nephew Lot and his family, he comes across Melchizedek, who is the priest and who is the king of Salem. Melchizedek is this mysterious figure that we don't have much information about in the Old Testament. We don't have any information really about him in the New Testament. And it's that secrecy of the mystery that surrounds Melchizedek that in Hebrews chapter 7 talks about him as being without father or without mother. Like no beginning of days and no end of days. And so some people would infer that, that must mean that that's Christ in the Old Testament. But no, it's not Christ in the Old Testament. It's just telling us that there's no record of that, of who his father was, who his mother was. There's no record of his birth, no record of his death. Does that mean that he was not born? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means we have no record of it. Refer back to many of the slaves in this country. They didn't know when they were born. And if you read many of the records, they might say, well, they think they're about 85, they think there may be 100, they think there may be 60. They don't know because there was no record that was officially kept. There would sometimes be records that the slave masters would hold that a slave was born and so forth, but there may not be the linkage of who the father was, who the mother was. All those things were shrouded, but that they exist, yes, absolutely, they did exist. So Melchizedek is this mysterious character who's introduced as being a priest and also introduced as being a king, occupying this dual role. And Abraham meets him, and it says in verse 18 through 20 that Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which have delivered your enemies into your hand." And he, meaning Abraham, gave him tithes of all. So we see the first introduction then of this concept of tithe. And the word tithe, it literally means a tenth. So he gave them a tenth of that which he had. He said, I'm not going to keep in the spoils that we have captured, lest someone say I've made Abram to prosper. But give to those who rightly need it and deserve it. But I am returning back a tenth of what God has blessed me with. So the concept then is a tenth is there in return. Now in Genesis 28, in Genesis chapter 28, we also see then another introduction in Genesis chapter 28. Genesis chapter 28, Jacob has left home and he is going forth to meet Laban ultimately. It says in verse 18 that as he has slept, God has given him this vision where the heavens open, he sees a ladder being let down from heaven to earth, and there are angels ascending and there are angels descending upon this ladder. And he wakes up and he says that the name of the place is called Bethel because he didn't know he was in the house of God or the place of God. And he makes a vow. This is the vow he makes. In verse 29 it says, and he made a vow to the Lord saying, if you are with me and you keep me in the way that I am going and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I can come back to my father's house in peace. And why is that of concern to him? It's concern to him because he's not leaving his father's house in peace. He has defrauded his brother, and his brother wants to take his life. He is leaving out, hopefully, what he anticipates may be for a short duration or short spell. But the reality of it is it's going to be over 20 years before Jacob is able to return back home. And he makes his vow to God, well, God, if you will bless me, if you will allow me to come back again to my father's house in peace, if you will give me again food, and you give me shelter, you give me clothing and raiment, I will give you a tenth or a tithe. So Jacob's covenant with God was that if God were to bless him with all these things he has listed, then he will bless God back with the tithe. So if you start thinking about it from that perspective, going already from the ancient beginning of tithe, that is different from our perception of tithe. Like off the bat, it's different from our perception of tithe. Because here their basis was he is returning a tithe because God has blessed him as he's gone out to warfare. And then Jacob is saying, God, I'm covenanting with you from what you've promised me. If you bring me back and you fulfill your word, and you allow these things to be done, I'm going to return to you a tithe. So that is different from our perspective then of our modern day system, an understanding of tithe and offering. And of course, it would change and it will continue to evolve. Now, in the book of Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30 through verse 32, Moses writes that all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed or the land or of the fruit of the tree, it is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. And if a man will eat it all, and if a man will at all redeem aught of his tithes, then he shall add thereto the fifth part thereof. And concerning the tithe of the herd or of the flock, even of whatsoever passeth under the rod, the tenth shall be holy unto the Lord. So we can see then that the tithe was, because the land, it all belonged to the Lord. And the arrangement that he is making with Israel is that there will be a tithe, whether it's of the seed of the land or the fruit of the tree, that it belongs to the Lord. It's like the tenth belongs to him. And if that tithe were to be redeemed, then a fifth would be added to it. Meaning, if the person that is returning the tithe were to redeem the fruits, the grains, the oils, the wine that had been devoted to the Lord, they will add a fifth to it. So in effect, instead of it being 10%, then it will be 15%. But when it came to the passing of the animals, it's simply they were to go out and they would take the animals and they would pass through. And so as they would count every 10 animals, then the 10th one belonged to God. So that animal that came, whether it was speckled, whether it was spotted, whether it was in some way blemished, it was God's. It belonged to him. It was considered sacred unto the Lord. So the 10th one was his. Again, regardless of the bodily circumstances, it was his. Not to be confused with the offering that was brought in for a sin offering, but this is talking about the concept of tithe. He claimed the 10th is his. And so if they were to try to redeem it, then that which was initially taken was holy, and then that which would be redeemed would also be holy. So the tithe was God. He's establishing himself as being the sovereign, as being the one who owns all, the one as to whom Israel is worshiping, who they owe their existence to, and that he is asking of them to return back a tithe in honor of their obedience and their faithfulness to him. Numbers 18 and verse 26. We'll read, of course, and we learned that the tithe ultimately would inevitably end up going to the priests, to the Levites. Now in chapter 18 of Numbers, we read that thus he spake unto the Levites, thus speaking to the Levites, and say to them that when you take the children of Israel the tithes, which I have given you from them for your inheritance. So the tithe was Levi's inheritance. It was their inheritance because they did not receive any land. All the other tribes received land, but Levi received no land. They were scattered throughout all of Israel. So because they would not have land that they could claim as their own, they were unable to farm. They'd be unable to shepherd. They'd be unable to support themselves. So they needed to be supported practically because they were devoting themselves in service to the greater good of the nation. Not because they had volunteered themselves, but because God had ordained them. He had chosen them. He had set them apart that they were going to be sacred unto the Lord. They were going to be as the firstborn anciently was. So that was conferred upon them as a tribe. Levi would step forth as a tribe. And they were then to receive the tithe that Israel had given, because ultimately God wasn't coming down to eat the fruit. Right? He wasn't coming down to drink the wine. He wasn't coming down to eat the corn. That was going to be devoted to the priests, to the Levites. They would be the ones that would be consuming it. They would be the ones who would get the benefit of it. So, but in part of his worship, he ordained it as such that this would be the process. This would be how it would function and flow. Because again, ultimately, the Lord doesn't need it. He says, the earth is mine and all the fullness thereof. It says, if I were hungry, I wouldn't even tell you. I have cattle upon 1,000 hills. Everything is mine. There are thousands of ways that he could create if he so needed and so desired, and yet he is inviting man as a participant with him in the covenant as such. And so he says, to the Levites, you are receiving the tithe because this is your inheritance. So you don't have physical land, but you're receiving the gifts of tithe to support and to sustain you. It says, then you shall offer up and heave offering of it for the Lord, even a 10th part of the tithe. So Israel was to devote their tithe to the Levites, ultimately to the Lord. And the Levites were to receive the tithe, and then they were to take of the tithe and to devote a tithe to the Lord. In other words, the Levites also returned tithe. So everyone returned tithe in the system of Israel. The people returned the tithe to the Levites, and the Levites returned the tithe as well. Why? Because God is sovereign of all. He is like the ruler of all. And one of the questions that comes up a lot today, the people will say, well, should you pay a return tithe on gross or net? Like talking about like when you get paid. Like, okay, I really want to know. Should I return tithe off of the gross I get? Or should I return tithe off of the net I get? So the job says we're going to pay you X amount an hour or salary wage, and I get that gross amount, but I don't actually get it because government takes out taxes. They take out Social Security. They take out unemployment, take out disability. State takes out taxes. So yes, I may gross X, but I end up getting Y. I look at it, and you may remember the joke that when you first start working, you look at what you signed up for, and you look at your pay stub, and you want to know, who is FICA and why did he take all my money? Like it's gone, significant portion. And many Christians then say, well, if I want to return tithe and offering, do I return off of the gross or the net? Now, I want to be clear here that there is no mandate that says gross or net. So I don't believe that God is going to punish someone or bless them less because they went off of the gross or the net. Like for us, sometimes it's like splitting hairs. All right, well, I want to make sure that, if I got 5,000, then I want to give God 500 versus if I gross 5,000, I only got 4,300, then I don't want to give as though the Lord would then say, well, you're going to be cursed because you were sincere. It's an act of sincerity, it's an act of devotion, whether it's gross or net. Now, that being stated, it's not, again, as such. Now, we can reason from the scriptures that the Bible says in Deuteronomy that they are to return off of the increase of the seed. That's what Deuteronomy 14:22 says. It says, thou shalt truly tithe of the increase of the seed. And translating it, you would tithe off of if we subbed in words, that'd be gross or the net. I'm not trying to set you up for a trick question. And there is 50% chance you'll get it right. All right? It says, thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of your seed. Is that gross or net? It's net. Net is the increase. Okay? So if you start with two items, let's say you're running a business and you devote, I'm going to start with 2 shirts and I'm going to sell these 2 shirts, right? You have those 2 shirts, you present them and you go forth to sell them and someone only buys one. You only have profit off of one, not 2. When someone buys the second one, then you would hopefully have profit off of 2. So net is simply like the quote, like the profit. That's the whole point of what is the profit that is there. Now, of course, gross, then we could also reason back. And so you say, all right, well, it's gross versus net. Again, I don't believe it's like a big theological matter of import. Like if you do either one, I think it's acceptable, okay, whether it's gross or whether it's net. Now, we'll say, though, if you do then the process of gross, then when you look at like Social Security and so forth, then you've already returned tithe on that. Because it's already, you're taking it off the top, like the very top. So if it's $5,000 and Social Security takes $300, and then years later you withdraw from Social Security, well, you've already paid tithe on that money when you had the gross. Now, if you went off with the net, then you technically, quote, did not return tithe on that. Because the net is what the take-home is, right? So then when I had the Social Security, then that would be a situation where I've never returned tithe on this. And this is an increase in that respect. Okay, so again, don't want to get too far down in the weeds, something to be able to think about, but the core is, in Deuteronomy chapter 14 and 22, it was based upon the increase that was there, the increase that the field brings. And so if they started off with 30 apples and then they only ended up bringing in 28 apples, then that's not an increase, that's a decrease. But if they started with 30 and they brought back 33, the increase is what? 3, not 30. 3 is 3, the difference. Hence, that's the difference of the net. It's like, okay, what is the difference between what I started from and what is the difference between what I ended at? They were code, return again off of the increase that is there. So what you have been prospered in that respect. So we start seeing again the concept of tithe being brought in, and I will introduce you to actually 2 tithes in Scripture. Maybe you have seen these before. First, we read in Numbers 18, verse 21 through 24. It says, "And behold, I've given the children of Levi all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance." And you can substitute, I've given them the tithe for their inheritance. And in Israel, of course, this is an agrarian society. And we must keep this in mind in their interaction, that they're not walking around with like greenbacks in their wallet. They don't have silver and gold coins that they're walking around with. Their transactions that they are conducting business with, it's based upon more of a system of grains, agriculture, wines, oils, and such. That was the commodity. The commodity and so forth that we use today, we use currency as dollars, etc. So of Levi, the tenth was theirs for an inheritance, for their service which they served, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. It says, "Neither must the children of Israel henceforth come near the tabernacle of the congregation, lest they bear sin and die." So the Levites were stepping in their behalf. It says, well, everyone is not able to go into the tabernacle, only the Levites are able to go in. But the Levites shall do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they have no inheritance. But the tithe of the children of Israel, which they offer as an heave offering unto the Lord, I have given to the Levites to inherit. Therefore I have said unto them, among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. So again, the Levites received the tithe, and yes, the portion that they devoted to God, that was consumed, burned upon the altar, etc. And a portion, of course, then that they were able to keep, and they ate as such. But again, the tithe, the sacredness, again, God is affixing to it. I'm giving it to them because they have no inheritance, and they're serving me in your stead. Now, one would reason and think that if God wanted, he could have provided manna for the Levites. Like he could have given them this food every day that they could have gone out and gotten. But he didn't. He could have sent ravens down to be able to provide the food, but he didn't. The mechanism that he ordained and set up in Israel at that time was that I'm giving this to you, you work the land, and they're going to be a co-partner with you in this respect. So you take of the 10th and you devote that to God, but you're going to give that to them, and they're going to receive that. They take that, and then they're going to again devote a portion, 10% to God, and then the other portion, or the 90%, they would be able to receive. So ultimately, then, in effect, you have like the same thing happening both for the Levite as well as the regular Israelite. Except when I say regular, meaning non-Levite, is that both gave 10% and both retained 90%. Okay. So that was theirs. And this injunction, it was to go on, in essence, in perpetuity until there'll be further instruction given. It's like this is their inheritance throughout all your generations. Because there's not coming a day in which they will have land, they will always not have land. And they didn't have land, you remember, when the blessing, or rather the prohibition came down from Jacob. When Jacob was to pass, he talked about Simeon and Levi being cruel. And he said the Levi is going to be like divided and scattered through all Israel. When we come a few years later on, now Levi is scattered throughout all Israel. But the scattering that they have is not as a consequence of a curse. The scattering is in consequence of a blessing. Because they remain faithful to the Lord at the worshiping of the golden calf. When everyone else apostatized, they didn't. So he said, I'm going to make Levi my priests. They're going to go in to teach and to instruct, and they're going to be scattered all throughout Israel, so that all throughout Israel, everyone will have the opportunity of being able to know and to worship me. So Israel would have the opportunity of being able to worship in that capacity. So the tithe was to be throughout all generations for them, and the Levite was to receive no inheritance. Now we receive or read about the double tithe, as some would call it. Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 22. It says, Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of your seed, that the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of the corn and of the wine, and of thine oil, and of the firstlings of thy flock, and of thy herds and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if it be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it over, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then thou shalt turn it into money, and bind up the money in your hand, and thou shalt go to the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul desires, ox, sheep, wine, or strong drink, or whatever you desire. Thou shalt eat before the Lord your God, and thou shalt rejoice, you and your house, and the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he have no part nor inheritance with thee. Let's break that apart very quickly. The second tithe, of this double tithe, as we call it, such you may come across it as such. Who was that for? Who shared it? For your answer, consider back on the first tithe in Numbers chapter 18. He said, the children of Israel have an inheritance, but the Levites, they don't have an inheritance. Return the tithe unto them throughout your generations, that they might have something. So the Levites were the recipients of the first tithe. That was theirs exclusively, and they, of course, were taken to devote to the Lord, a tenth, and so forth. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 14, 22 through 27, we have the concept being introduced in of what many scholars will call like a second tithe or a double tithe. Now, of this one, it says, look, when you have this tithe of the increase of the land, and you have the things to be able to go, and you want to go to the place that I'm going to designate to be able to be worshiped, you don't have to be encumbered by bringing all of these grains. So imagine if you have throughout the year, you've accumulated all this surplus tithe. And you have all vats of wine and vats of oil. And you have all this grain. He's saying that's going to be pretty cumbersome to travel with all those things, right? Like you're going from Naphtali, and you need to make it ultimately to Jerusalem. Right? You're going from Reuben, you need to make it up to Jerusalem. You're going from Dan, you need to make it down to Jerusalem. That's going to be pretty encumbering to take all those things. So what you can do is do what? Essentially, sell it or trade it for money. And then once you have the money in hand, that's a lot easier to travel with, is it not? Right? Like once you have the coins, the money in hand, then you can go travel with that. One thing you can appreciate about God is reasonable. Like we can become unreasonable. Like in our own estimation, we say, well, that grain is devoted to the Lord, it's holy. So we got to figure out a way to be able to get it up to Jerusalem, hundreds of miles away. And God is like being practical with them. Look, now take the grain, convert it to money, go up to Jerusalem. He doesn't identify Jerusalem. Ultimately, it will be Jerusalem because it would be Shiloh temporarily as a place that was devoted. There would be other places in Hebron and so forth, but ultimately it would become Jerusalem. So I might say Jerusalem, and you get the idea. The thing was, take it and you may convert it into money. It says, and when you have the money, go to the place that God shall choose. And then take the money and do what? Convert it back into these various things. So you can convert it back and you can get whatever your soul desires, ox, sheep, wine, strong drink, etc. Okay, so they'll take the money and they will be able to convert it back in. Now, who was the recipient of this second tithe? Eat there before the Lord your God. And you shall rejoice, you and your household, and the Levite that is within. So the double tithe was a festival offering that the people enjoyed with the Levites. So please make that distinction mentally. The first tithe was exclusively for the Levites. But this double tithe was one that they were able to redeem, and they would buy whatever they desired, and it was a festival or celebration that the people ate with the Levites. So it was a feast, a celebration. Why are you eating with him? It says, because he doesn't have any inheritance with thee. Now please keep in mind that this is not saying that the Levite is lazy, that the Levite doesn't work. The Levite is like just looking for a handout. That's not what it is suggesting. It is simply stating that they have no inheritance. I have asked them to forego this, and because I've asked them to forego this, I'm asking you to supply this in their stead. That's what it's like suggesting and stating. So this is this second tithe that is listed here. And now we looked at the second tithe, and I want to introduce you to some variation of that second tithe. Verse 28 and 29. At the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of your increase, the same year, and shall lay it up within your gates. And the Levite, because they have no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, which are within your gates, they shall come, and they shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of your hands, which thou doest. Who was this tithe for? It was for the poor. The Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. Those that are within your gates, let them come and sit down and there be satisfied. So every third year, that second tithe that we read about previously, it would not go to Jerusalem or would not go to Shiloh or wherever the place would be appointed. But rather it would be used like locally, be used in a local setting. And what would it be used for locally? You still have the Levite always being remembered. Like you saw it in the first, you saw it in the second, you also see it in this one that's taking place. Levi is remembered. But now this is like a broader application of it. And what's happening in this application? It says, I want you to remember again the stranger that is within your gate. I want you to think about the fatherless. Keep in mind the widow. Now, certainly doesn't state it, but we would also include the orphans because there was always like the provision for the fatherless, for the widows, for the orphans, for those who were destitute, those who were poor. Provision was being made and being established for this. And again, this will take place on the every third year. Okay, so we're keeping track then in effect, Israel on an annual basis is returning back and their tithe, 10% is devoted to the priests, off of Numbers chapter 18. And we also read about the second tithe that was in Deuteronomy chapter 14. So how much is then, if we add those up per annum, is Israel giving or returning to the Lord? 10% plus 10% is 20%. So they're returning back 20% of their, quote, income to the Lord. Now, when we look at this tithe, that would take place in the third year, some scholars think that it is an addition to what they were already doing. So that in effect, if it's an addition to what they were doing before, how much tithe then would be in the third year? We already established a baseline of 20%. You add another 10%, you have 30%. Okay? So that in effect then if we divided that out over the course of 3 years, then we would say they were on average paying about 23, 24%, or returning 23, 24%, you say pay a return, tithe to God. Now, it's not clear whether or not this was an addition or whether this, my understanding is just in deference, just a different use in that third year. But regardless, anywhere from 20 to 23% we could say they were tithing to the Lord. And the tithe had different purposes. Okay, we've seen it had different purposes to which it was devoted. And we also see something that's interesting too here is that this third year, this was to take care of the things that were needed there within their local gates and communities. All right, Deuteronomy 26, 12, and 13, again, it says, when you have made an end of tithing of all the tithes of the increase of the third year, which is the year of tithing, and you've given it to the Levite, to the stranger, and to the fatherless, and the widow, that they might eat within the gates, and be filled, then thou shalt say before the Lord thy God, I have brought away the hallowed things out of mine house, and have also given them unto the Levite, and to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow. According to all thy commandments which thou hast commanded me, I have not transgressed thy commandments, neither have I forgotten thee. So once they had done all what had been prescribed in this third year, then they were to pronounce again this acknowledging that so true they had been to God in this respect. Now, one might think then that if they are returning all this tithe, like 20%, 23%, that would cripple them, right? That would put a hurt on them financially. Like, if I'm giving 20% to 23, some say 25% of my income to the Levites, then that's going to put me in a precarious situation. Now, the reality of it is, when we look back, that there was a promise and a blessing that was there that was a sign that God was going to bless them as such. Now, it wasn't tied into the fixation of tithe and offering, but there's a general covenant promise that he had told them. He said, listen, in Deuteronomy, he says, I'm going to make you the head and not the tail. I'm going to make you so that you're able to lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. I'm going to elevate you, and as you go into the land, I'm going to cause it to be so prosperous that in the sixth year, there's going to be such an abundance of outflowing of grain and of crops and blessings that you will rest on the seventh year of the sabbatical year. That the land will rest. You won't till it, you won't work it, and all that is there, that the poor are also able to go in and they're able to reap and they're able to eat, so that the land will enjoy a Sabbath and the people also will enjoy my worship. And so it was a year of festivity, a year of celebration, a year of praise to God. And then they will return back again thereafter and begin to labor. And now when you went into the Jubilee year, which was that 50th year, the big Jubilee, the 50th year, essentially the land would lay dormant for a couple of years. And all of that was in response of the blessing of Jehovah. It's like God is saying, I'm going to bless you so much that you will not have need. And as they stepped out then and they sought to honor him, it did not eradicate poverty from Israel. You would still have that. What it did, though, is it would lead the people to trust and to rely and to look to God. Like, Lord, if you want me to leave the field, that would take a lot of faith to leave a field unworked for a year if you're a farmer. Like we struggle with maybe not working on Sabbath for one day. But it's saying, I want you to leave the field unoccupied for a year. And believe me, trust me, and I'm going to give you so much in the sixth year that it's going to be enough to supply that for the other time. I would submit that will require greater faith than what we are used to manifesting. And much more so, because in our instances, more times than not, like you don't even have to work on Sabbath. Sometimes, yes, job ask and so forth, but just generally speaking, more it's like if I know they want me to do something on Sabbath, I'm working at the factory, I know they want me to do something, I just say, hey, I need another shift. And they will try to accommodate. Maybe they don't accommodate, and then there's also the reality that, no, well, look, they don't accommodate, that's religious discrimination, and so I'm able to file a suit if need be. But this is not about filing a suit, and I'm not saying filing a suit is right or wrong, but it was a context then of them, would you be willing to trust me to let the land sit, and then I'm going to bless abundantly, to pour you out a blessing that they will not be able, or room enough to receive it. So they had these tithes that they were accustomed to in Israel. And again, that did not handicap them, but I would argue that in many respects it showed again their blessing, because they're reading it out, saying, okay, Lord, you told us to do this with the second tithe, and we have done it, and we're more or less them saying those words was though they were saying it directly to God. Like, God, I have done this. You may come and bear witness to it. I've not defrauded the sojourner. I've taken care of the fatherless. I've taken care of the orphan and the widow. All those different things because you have blessed me. So thank you, that I might participate and serve with you. So we see that the tithing, of course, that is in existence there in the Old Testament. Now going to the concept of the storehouse. Was there a storehouse or a place to be able to hold? Now I've called it the treasury. You may call it that, or the storehouse, but it's a concept in it being able to store, to hold these different things. How was that done? How was that accomplished? I'm looking at the storehouse and everything that is here, and frankly, I think we should probably pause here, because to go through the storehouse and then the related pieces there will certainly be a pretty ambitious undertaking. So with that in mind, I will share again at least one of the thoughts I want you to keep in mind. And I'm going to go here. It's 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 6 and 7. And when considering again tithing and offering and so forth, I think it's important to keep a framework in mind with it. And that's 1 Corinthians 9 and 6 and 7. And he says that he that sows sparingly shall reap sparingly, he which sows bountifully shall reap bountifully. And please do not misunderstand the first part. Sometimes it has been used to try to cajole people to put their faith to the test. Like here, put in 1,000 and God's going to bless you back bountifully. Put in 100, God's going to bless you back bountifully. Put in X and God's going to bless you back bountifully. That's not the nature of what he's saying. It's really dealing with the core and the essence of the reason behind it, like the motive that is spurring it. If the motive that is spurring it is right, the rest is going to fall into line. If the motive that is spurring it is wrong, it's always going to be wrong. You consider in a religious setting and so forth, the reality is sometimes we're tested by like the physical in terms of like finances. It seems like to touch a lot. And Jesus indicated, look, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And when we think about it and we consider it, it can feel like a lot to say, well, I'm going to give $50 to the cause of God. It's like there's so much I can do with that. And we can go into the store and it's like, well, that $50, that's like nothing. That's a good deal. Like, see a pair of shoes on sale, see a outfit. Oh, $50, oh, that's nothing. I could get that. Matter of fact, let me get 2 of those. And yet, when we talk about in the service of Jehovah, I can look at the 50 and say, well, that's a little too much to give. Let me find, and give something smaller. But God is not concerned about the dollars. And that's what sometimes we mix it up and think he's concerned about the dollar. Like the number of digits behind it. He's not concerned about that. He tried to make that very known in the story of the widow who cast in the mite. And the story is not saying to give everything that you have to God. That's not the point. The point was, give your best to God. And if your best is everything, he will accept it. If everything is not your best, he will not accept it. She gave of her need. Others gave of their abundance. And so in 1 Corinthians 9, it's the principle is true that if we are stingy, this is a result of stinginess. If we are bountiful, this is a result of bountifulness. It's not like challenging us into a level of that. The core is that every man as he is purposed in his heart. So if I have a lot to give and God has purposed it in my heart, then give a lot. If I have a little to give and God has purposed it in my heart, then give a little. It's no like binary situation. Like it has to be at this threshold for God to receive it. Like, all right, if it's less, because we would say as human beings, well that's not, to the widows, like you might as well keep that. That's not really going to move the needle. Thank you so much for your willingness, but we don't need, you're doing a campaign of some sort and you're trying to raise $10,000 and someone shows up with $1, like, well, hey, that's not really moving the needle. We need like a few more of those dollars, right? We need put some more zeros on that. But that was not what he was saying. It's like the dollar was what she didn't have. But she wanted to be able to give something. And that's what this verse is saying, is that every man, according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly, nor of necessity. So the Lord wants us to give as he gives, like as he emulates and he demonstrates it. Not grudgingly, meaning I don't want to do this, but I'm being forced into doing it. Like I don't want to, but they keep pressuring me. They're putting the clamps on me. Everybody else is putting in something. I need to put in something so I don't stick out. That's what he's speaking against. It's not I'm begrudgingly doing it. Yeah, I'm doing it, but I wish I didn't have to. It's like, no, don't do that. That's not the right spirit, not the right attitude. I'm doing it out of necessity. That's not the right attitude. He loves a cheerful giver. I want to do this. I've given this. I wish that there were more I could do, maybe. I'm not trying to buy your favor or curry your favor. But I want to give that in giving, I might become more like you. That is the reason ultimately behind it, because again, he didn't need their tithe. He didn't need their offering, but what he did desire is a heart. What he so desires as well from us is our heart, because he doesn't need our tithe. He doesn't need our offering. But what he does need, what he does ask of every person, is their heart. Father in heaven, we offer the gift again today of our hearts. We pray that you would forgive us of all of our sins. Pray that you would help us as we continue to go through learning, maybe relearning of tithe and offering. Help us to see again, it's not to the dollar amount and to the cent, but to the purpose and to the intent of the heart. So we won't give because we're trying to pay. We don't give because we're trying to earn, or we're trying to please you, because there's nothing that we can do to please you. But we give, we return, because you have blessed us, and we want to thank you for that. So whether it's much, whether it's little, in our own estimation, it's the motive and the prompts the gift. And so I pray that the motives and the promptings of the heart might be pure and clean. Thank you again for your grace. Thank you so much again for your mercy and your blessings, for we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.